The decision to attempt foam suppression came down to a matter of minutes. Captain Martinez gathered his team and the gas company technicians for a rapid strategy session while Sarah watched from the emergency perimeter. She could see the tension in their faces as they weighed options that all carried enormous risks. "We have one shot at this," the captain announced to his crew. "The foam application has to be perfect on the first try. If we mess it up, we could create conditions that actually trigger the explosion we're trying to prevent." The foam suppression technique involved spraying specialized chemical foam over the area where gas was accumulating. The foam would create a barrier that could temporarily prevent gas from reaching dangerous concentration levels, giving emergency workers a narrow window to access the underground shutoff valve. But the process required precise coordination between multiple teams working in lethal proximity to explosive gases. Sarah watched the preparations with growing anxiety. Despite all her research into emergency response procedures, seeing the actual implementation was far more terrifying than reading about it in case studies. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, and everyone involved knew that a single mistake could cost dozens of lives. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Brad Morrison. "Martinez, need your notes on this gas leak story. Janet wants me to take over coverage since you're not being responsive." Sarah deleted the message without responding. Her colleagues still didn't understand that this wasn't just a story to be covered. It was a community crisis where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The competitive dynamics of television news seemed petty and irrelevant when measured against the real-world consequences of infrastructure failure. As the foam suppression team prepared their equipment, the gas company technicians made a discovery that changed everything. Using underground monitoring equipment, they had detected that the gas leak was not just from the original rupture beneath the school. The escaping gas had found a pathway through underground utility tunnels and was now venting at multiple locations throughout a 3-block area. "Captain, we've got gas emerging at 5 different points," the lead technician reported. "The underground tunnel system is acting like a distribution network, spreading the leak far beyond the original failure point." This revelation meant that the danger zone was much larger than anyone had initially realized. Buildings throughout the neighborhood could be at risk, and the foam suppression technique would have to be applied at multiple locations simultaneously. The emergency response team didn't have sufficient equipment or personnel to handle such an expanded operation. Sarah felt a growing sense of urgency as she realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about saving the people at Riverside Elementary. It was about preventing a disaster that could affect hundreds of additional residents throughout the surrounding neighborhoods. Captain Martinez made the difficult decision to expand the evacuation zone to include a 3-block radius around the school. Police officers and firefighters began going door to door, informing residents that they needed to leave their homes immediately. Many people were confused and resistant, having no idea that their neighborhood was sitting on top of a potential bomb. "This is where I can help," Sarah told the captain. "I know this community. A lot of these residents know me from stories I've done about local issues. They might listen to me when they won't listen to strangers in uniforms." Captain Martinez hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Go with Officer Johnson. Help him explain the situation to residents. But don't take any unnecessary risks. If people won't leave voluntarily, we'll deal with that through official channels." Sarah joined Officer Johnson as he began knocking on doors along Maple Street. The first house they approached belonged to Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman who Sarah had interviewed the previous year for a story about neighborhood garden clubs. "Mrs. Chun, it's Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News. We need you to leave your house right now because of a gas leak emergency." The elderly woman looked confused and frightened. "A gas leak? But I don't smell anything. The gas is underground and it's spreading through utility tunnels. It's not safe for you to stay here. Do you have somewhere you can go for a few hours?" Mrs. Chin's English was limited, and she seemed to have trouble understanding the urgency of the situation. Sarah realized that she needed to find a way to communicate more effectively with residents who might have language barriers or mobility limitations. At the next house, they encountered a more challenging situation. Mr. Rodriguez, a middle-aged construction worker, was skeptical of the evacuation order and refused to leave his property. "This is just another city scam to get people out of their houses so they can condemn the buildings," he said angrily. I'm not falling for it. Sarah tried to explain the technical aspects of the gas leak, but Mr. Rodriguez remained unconvinced. She realized that her credibility as a local reporter was both helping and hurting in different situations. Some people trusted her because they recognized her from television, while others saw her as part of the media establishment they distrusted. Officer Johnson ultimately had to inform Mr. Rodriguez that the evacuation was now mandatory and that he could be arrested for refusing to comply. The man grudgingly agreed to leave, but Sarah could see similar resistance developing at other houses along the street. As they worked their way through the neighborhood, Sarah began to understand the human complexity of emergency response. Each household presented different challenges. Elderly residents who needed help gathering medications, families with small children who were scared and confused, people with disabilities who required special assistance, and individuals who simply refused to believe that the danger was real. The process was taking much longer than anyone had anticipated, and time was running out. Gas concentration readings continued to climb at multiple locations, and the window for safely implementing foam suppression was rapidly closing. Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent message from Captain Martinez. All evacuation teams, we need to wrap up door-to-door operations immediately. Gas levels are approaching critical mass at several locations. We're moving to emergency foam deployment in 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Sarah looked around at the houses they still hadn't reached, the families who were still gathering their belongings, the elderly residents who needed help walking to safety. 3 minutes wasn't enough time to complete the evacuation properly, but it might be the last chance to prevent a catastrophic explosion. She made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her life. Officer Johnson, I'm going to run ahead and do a quick check of the remaining houses, just to make sure nobody's still inside when they start the foam deployment. Martinez, you don't have time. We need to clear the area now. But Sarah was already running down the street, moving faster than she had ever moved in her life. She knew that 3 minutes wasn't enough time to do a thorough search, but it might be enough to save someone who had been missed in the initial evacuation efforts. The first house appeared empty, with doors and windows open indicating that the residents had already left. The second house was also vacant, but at the third house, Sarah could see lights on in an upstairs window. She pounded on the front door while shouting at the top of her voice. Emergency evacuation. You need to get out now. An elderly man appeared at the door, moving slowly with the aid of a walker. Sarah recognized him as Mr. Peterson, a retired teacher who lived alone and rarely left his house. Mr. Peterson, there's a gas leak. You have to come with me right now. The old man looked confused and moved with agonizing slowness. Sarah realized that he wouldn't be able to walk to safety in the remaining time before foam deployment began. She would have to help him, even though it meant putting herself at maximum risk. Supporting Mr. Peterson as he struggled with his walker, Sarah began moving as quickly as possible toward the evacuation zone. Each step seemed to take forever, and she could hear emergency vehicles revving their engines in preparation for the foam suppression operation. Her radio crackled with the final warning. All personnel, clear the foam deployment zone. Beginning suppression in 60 seconds. They were still 2 blocks away from safety when Sarah heard the distinctive sound of foam deployment equipment starting up. The operation had begun, and they were still in the danger zone. If the foam application failed and triggered an explosion, they would be caught in the blast radius. Sarah made a desperate decision. Abandoning the walker, she physically picked up Mr. Peterson and began carrying him toward the evacuation zone. The elderly man was lighter than she had expected, but running while carrying another person quickly exhausted her strength. 30 seconds to foam deployment, the radio announced. Sarah's lungs were burning, and her legs felt like they might give out, but she kept running. Behind her, she could hear the sound of foam equipment moving closer to the gas leak sites. Everything depended on the next few moments. 15 seconds. She could see the evacuation zone ahead of her, marked by emergency vehicles and personnel. Police officers were waving frantically, urging her to move faster. Mr. Peterson seemed to understand the urgency and was trying to help by holding on to Sarah's shoulders to make himself easier to carry. 10 seconds. Sarah summoned her last reserves of energy and sprinted the final 50 yards to safety. Emergency personnel grabbed both her and Mr. Peterson, pulling them behind the protective barrier of fire trucks just as the foam deployment reached maximum coverage. For a moment, everyone held their breath waiting to see if the foam suppression would work or if it would trigger the explosion they were all trying to prevent. The specialized foam created an eerie white blanket over a 3-block area, temporarily suppressing the gas concentrations that had been building toward critical levels. In the sudden silence that followed the foam deployment, Sarah could hear her heart pounding and Mr. Peterson's labored breathing. They had made it to safety, but the crisis wasn't over yet. The foam suppression had only bought emergency crews a narrow window of time to access the underground shutoff valve. Gas company technicians moved quickly through the foam-covered area, following predetermined routes to the utility vault where the main shutoff valve was located. Sarah watched from the evacuation zone as they disappeared into the white fog, knowing that their success or failure would determine whether 200 people had truly been saved or merely delayed their encounter with disaster. The radio communications between emergency teams provided a tense countdown of the valve shutdown operation. Team 1 in position at the utility vault. Valve access confirmed. Beginning shutdown sequence. Each update brought either relief or new anxiety as technical complications arose and were resolved. The underground utility vault had been partially flooded by the gas leak, making it difficult to access the shutoff mechanism. Specialized pumping equipment had to be deployed to clear the area before technicians could safely work on the valve controls. Valve shutdown complete. Came the final radio transmission. Gas flow terminated. Beginning ventilation procedures. A cheer went up from the assembled emergency responders, evacuated residents, and school personnel who had been waiting in the evacuation zone. The immediate crisis was over, but Sarah knew that the larger story was just beginning. As the foam began to dissipate and gas concentrations dropped to safe levels, the magnitude of what had almost happened became clear. Investigation of the underground tunnel system revealed that gas had been accumulating for hours throughout a much wider area than anyone had initially realized. If the leak had continued for another hour, or if any significant ignition source had been introduced, the explosion could have leveled several city blocks. Captain Martinez approached Sarah as emergency crews began the process of allowing residents to return to their homes. Ms. Martinez, what you did today saved lives. That evacuation work and your decision to go back for Mr. Peterson, that was heroic. Sarah felt emotionally and physically drained by the day's events. I just did what needed to be done. The real heroes are your team and the gas company technicians who shut off that valve. Maybe, but none of us would have known about this situation if you hadn't been investigating infrastructure problems and recognized the signs of a major leak. How many people do you think were in that danger zone? Sarah did a quick mental calculation based on the school population and the residential density of the surrounding neighborhood. Probably around 200 people in the school, plus maybe another 150 residents in the evacuation area. So your investigation and your actions today potentially saved 350 lives. The number seemed surreal to Sarah. When she had started investigating infrastructure problems months earlier, she had been focused on municipal accountability and public safety policy. She never imagined that her reporting would lead directly to preventing a mass casualty disaster. As emergency crews completed their safety checks and began allowing residents to return to their homes, Sarah finally turned her phone back on. She had dozens of missed calls from Channel 7, messages from other news outlets asking for interviews, and text messages from friends and family who had heard about the emergency on social media. The first call she returned was to Janet Walsh at the station. Martinez, where have you been? This is the biggest story of the year, and we haven't been able to reach our own reporter who's on scene. Janet, I was a little busy trying to help save people's lives. Well, we need you to do a live report immediately. Brad has been covering the story, but he doesn't have the background knowledge that you do. We need your expertise on camera. Sarah looked around at the families being reunited, the emergency responders packing up their equipment, and the neighborhood that had just narrowly avoided catastrophe. The idea of turning this human drama into television content still felt wrong to her. I'll file a comprehensive report, but I'm not doing any live shots today. This community has been through enough without having television cameras shoved in their faces while they're still processing what happened. Martinez, this is not a request. You're a reporter, and this is news. I need you on camera in 30 minutes, or you can start looking for another job. Sarah took a deep breath before responding. Janet, if that's your choice, then I guess I'm looking for another job. Some things are more important than ratings. She ended the call and immediately felt a sense of relief. For months, she had been struggling with the conflict between serious journalism and television news entertainment. Today's events had clarified her priorities in a way that no amount of career planning could have accomplished. Dr. Rodriguez, the geology professor who had provided expert analysis for Sarah's original infrastructure story, appeared at her side. The professor had heard about the gas leak emergency on the radio and had driven to the scene to offer her assistance. Sarah, I heard what happened today. Your investigation was absolutely vindicated. I wish I had been wrong, Sarah replied. This whole disaster could have been prevented if city officials had taken the warning signs seriously instead of trying to cover them up. But that's exactly why your work is so important. Investigative journalism that holds public officials accountable for infrastructure maintenance isn't just about politics. It's about public safety. What you did today proves that. As Sarah reflected on the day's events, she realized that her career had taken an unexpected turn. She was no longer the underestimated small-market reporter struggling for recognition from her colleagues. She had become someone who understood that journalism at its best was about serving the public interest, even when that service came at personal and professional cost. The story of the Riverside Elementary gas leak would eventually lead to a comprehensive investigation of municipal infrastructure throughout the region. City officials who had tried to cover up the problem would face accountability for their decisions. Building codes would be strengthened to prevent similar situations in the future. And Sarah's reporting would be recognized with journalism awards that validated her approach to investigative reporting. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that 200 people had gone home safely that evening because someone had been paying attention to warning signs that others chose to ignore. Sarah had learned that real journalism wasn't about television ratings or career advancement. It was about being ready to act when the community needed someone to stand between ordinary people and preventable disasters. As the last emergency vehicles left Riverside Elementary and the neighborhood returned to normal, Sarah began planning her next investigation. There were infrastructure problems throughout the city that deserved attention before they became crises. She had work to do, and now she knew exactly what that work really meant. The organized evacuation Sarah had hoped for quickly began to show signs of strain. As word spread among parents and teachers about the gas leak, panic started to creep into what had been an orderly process. Some parents, desperate to reach their children, began pushing past the security barriers Sarah and the guard had established. Others were demanding to drive their cars closer to the building to pick up their kids faster. Sarah found herself in the impossible position of trying to explain complex safety protocols to frightened people who just wanted their families safe. Every time someone reached for their car keys or raised their voice in frustration, she felt her heart skip a beat. Any sudden sound or electrical spark could turn the area into a fireball. Please, you have to understand, Sarah told a group of parents who were arguing with the security guard. Your cars have electrical systems that could create sparks. Walking is the only safe way to leave this area right now. Walking? My daughter has asthma, and she's still inside that building, shouted a father whose face was flushed with anger and fear. I'm not leaving her in there while you play it safe with some gas leak that might not even be real. Before Sarah could respond, Principal Johnson appeared at her side. The middle-aged educator had grasped the severity of the situation and was working to maintain calm while expediting the evacuation process. Mr. Patterson, I understand your concern about Rebecca, the principal said in a calm but firm voice. But the safest thing for everyone, including your daughter, is to follow the evacuation procedures. Our teachers are bringing all the children to the safe zone, and running into the building will only create confusion and potential danger. Sarah was grateful for the principal's support, but she could see that the gas shimmer near the building was becoming more pronounced. They were running out of time, and there were still at least 50 people inside the school. She made a decision that violated every rule about reporter safety and professional objectivity. Principal Johnson, I'm going to help get the remaining people out. I know this building's layout from covering school events, and I can move through it quickly. The principal looked shocked. Ms. Martinez, I can't ask you to put yourself at risk. This is our responsibility. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. But I need you to radio the teachers still inside and tell them to have everyone ready to move when I reach them. No stopping to grab personal belongings, no detours. Just get to the exits as fast as safely possible. Before anyone could argue with her decision, Sarah jogged toward the school's main entrance. The gas smell was now strong enough to make her slightly dizzy, and she knew that the concentration was approaching dangerous levels. She had maybe 5 minutes to help clear the remaining people from the building. Inside the school, Sarah found organized chaos. Teachers were moving methodically through their evacuation procedures, but the process was taking longer than anyone had anticipated. Some classrooms were on the building's second floor, requiring more time to safely navigate stairs with young children. Special needs students required individual assistance, slowing down the overall timeline. Sarah ran to the nearest classroom where she found Mrs. Peterson, a kindergarten teacher, helping 5-year-olds put on their jackets. Mrs. Peterson, there's no time for jackets. The gas leak is getting worse. We need to get these kids out right now. The teacher looked torn between following safety protocols and responding to Sarah's urgent warning. But the children will be cold without their coats. They'll be a lot colder if the building explodes, Sarah said bluntly. Please, just trust me. Get them to the exits immediately. The teacher's eyes widened as she realized the gravity of the situation. She quickly abandoned the jacket routine and began leading her students toward the stairs. Sarah moved to the next classroom, then the next, delivering the same urgent message to teachers who were still following standard evacuation procedures. As she worked her way through the building, Sarah encountered Dr. Williams, the school's counselor, who was helping a student with mobility challenges navigate the hallway with his wheelchair. Dr. Williams, do you need help getting him to the exit? I've got Marcus handled, but there are 3 teachers still on the second floor with their classes. They're moving slow because some of the kids are scared and don't understand why they can't grab their backpacks. Sarah nodded and headed for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The gas smell was definitely stronger on the upper floor. Apparently, the leak was large enough that fumes were infiltrating the building's ventilation system. This was exactly the scenario that Dr. Rodriguez had warned about in their interviews. She found the remaining teachers and their students clustered near the top of the stairs. The children were clearly confused and some were starting to cry, sensing the adults' anxiety but not understanding the danger. Sarah knew that managing frightened children while maintaining the urgency of the situation would require a delicate touch. Hi everyone, Sarah said in the cheerful voice she used when covering school events. I'm Sarah from the TV news. We're going to play a special game today called Quick Exit, where we see how fast we can get outside to the playground. But here's the most important rule. We have to be super quiet, like we're sneaking up on someone. The children immediately perked up at the mention of a game, and the teachers gave Sarah grateful looks for reframing the evacuation in terms the kids could understand and enjoy. Within moments, 3 classes of elementary students were quietly but quickly making their way down the stairs, treating the emergency evacuation like an exciting adventure. As Sarah helped guide the last group of children toward the exit, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and saw that it was coming from Channel 7. Under normal circumstances, she would never ignore a call from the station during a breaking news situation. But these weren't normal circumstances, and she let the call go to voicemail. Outside the building, the scene had transformed dramatically. Fire trucks, police cars, and hazmat vehicles now surrounded the school with their emergency lights flashing. County gas company technicians were setting up monitoring equipment while emergency coordinators established a command center. Sarah was relieved to see that professional responders had arrived, but she was also worried that all the emergency vehicles might create the very spark hazard she had been trying to avoid. She approached the fire chief, a grizzled veteran named Captain Martinez who she had interviewed for previous stories about emergency preparedness. Captain Martinez, I'm the one who called this in. The gas concentration is getting really dangerous. All those emergency vehicles with their electrical systems. We're aware of the risk, the captain said tersely. All non-essential electronics have been shut down, and we're operating on battery backup only. But I need you to clear the area immediately. This is now an official emergency response zone. I understand, but there might still be people in the building. I was just inside helping with the evacuation. Captain Martinez looked at her with a mixture of respect and exasperation. Ms. Martinez, what you did was brave, but incredibly reckless. You could have been killed if that gas had ignited while you were inside. Before Sarah could respond, a county hazmat specialist approached with readings from his monitoring equipment. Chief, we've got concentrations approaching the lower explosive limit near the building's foundation. And it's climbing fast. Sarah felt a chill run through her body. The lower explosive limit meant they were approaching the point where the gas concentration could support combustion. If it reached the upper explosive limit, the entire area would become a potential bomb waiting for an ignition source. How long do we have? The fire chief asked. At the current rate of accumulation, maybe 10 to 15 minutes before we hit critical levels. And that's assuming no change in wind conditions. The fire chief immediately began coordinating with the other emergency responders. Sarah watched as firefighters prepared specialized foam equipment that could be used to suppress potential fires, while gas company technicians worked frantically to locate the exact source of the leak so they could shut off the flow. From her position at the edge of the emergency perimeter, Sarah could see that the evacuation was essentially complete. Teachers were taking attendance in the safe zone 2 blocks away, parents were being reunited with their children, and emergency medical teams were standing by in case anyone had been overcome by gas fumes. But Sarah also noticed something that made her stomach drop. In all the confusion of the evacuation, several cars had been left in the school's parking lot. Their owners had followed instructions to walk away from the building, but the vehicles were still sitting there with their engines cooling down. If the gas concentration continued to build and reach those cars, the hot metal or electrical components could provide enough heat to trigger an explosion. She pointed out the concern to Captain Martinez, who immediately understood the implications. We need to get those cars moved, but we can't risk starting the engines in this environment, he said. We'll have to push them manually to a safe distance. This presented a new challenge. Moving heavy vehicles by hand would require several people to work in close proximity to the most dangerous area. The fire department had protocols for this kind of situation, but it would take time to implement them safely. Captain, I volunteer to help push the cars, Sarah said. I know the layout of that parking lot better than your crew, and I'm smaller, so I'll present less risk if something goes wrong. Absolutely not. You've done enough already. This is a job for trained professionals. But even as the fire chief was refusing her help, Sarah could see that his team was struggling with the logistics of the car removal. They had the equipment and expertise to handle the gas leak itself, but the vehicles presented an unusual complication that their standard procedures weren't designed to address quickly. Meanwhile, the gas company technicians had located the source of the leak. As Sarah had suspected, it was a major rupture in an aging gas main that ran directly beneath the school building. The pipe had been weakened by soil shifting caused by new construction in the area, and it had finally failed completely when a delivery truck had driven over the weakened section earlier that afternoon. We can shut off the gas flow at the main valve, the lead technician explained to Captain Martinez. But there's already a massive amount of gas in the ground that will continue to vent for hours. And we can't get to the valve safely until we deal with the concentration levels near the building. This was the nightmare scenario Sarah had been investigating for months. A catastrophic infrastructure failure that put hundreds of people at risk because city officials had ignored warning signs in favor of political and economic considerations. But there was no time now for "I told you so" moments. The focus had to be entirely on preventing disaster. As emergency responders worked to implement their safety protocols, Sarah noticed that local media had started arriving at the scene. Channel 7's news van pulled up at the edge of the emergency perimeter, and she could see Brad Morrison getting out with a camera crew. Her phone buzzed again with another call from the station. This time she answered it. Sarah here. Martinez, where the hell are you? It was Janet Walsh, and she sounded furious. We've got reports of a major emergency at some school, and Brad says you're already on scene but not responding to our calls. What's your status? Janet, I can't really talk right now. I'm in the middle of an emergency response situation. That's exactly why you need to be talking. This is breaking news, and you're our reporter on scene. I need you to go live in 10 minutes with whatever you've got. Sarah looked around at the emergency responders working frantically to prevent a potential explosion, at the families gathered in the safe zone worried about their children and their community, at the hazmat specialists monitoring gas levels that could turn deadly at any moment. The idea of turning this life-or-death situation into a live television broadcast seemed surreal. Janet, I don't think you understand. This isn't just a story. People's lives are at stake right now. I can't do a live shot while emergency crews are trying to prevent an explosion. That's exactly when we need to be on the air. This is the biggest story to hit our market in years. If you can't handle live breaking news coverage, I'll send Brad over to take the lead. Sarah felt a familiar surge of frustration at her news director's priorities. Even in the middle of a genuine emergency, the focus was on ratings and competitive advantage rather than public safety or responsible journalism. But she also realized that this situation was bigger than her career concerns or her ongoing conflicts with station management. Look, I'll file a report as soon as it's safe to do so. But right now I need to focus on helping these emergency responders. People's lives are more important than getting on the air first. She ended the call before Janet could respond. Almost immediately, the phone started ringing again, but Sarah turned it off. She had made her choice about where her priorities lay, and the consequences for her career would have to wait. Captain Martinez was coordinating the manual removal of vehicles from the parking lot when one of his firefighters noticed something alarming. The gas concentration readings near the building had suddenly spiked, indicating that the leak was getting worse rather than stabilizing. "Chief, we've got a problem," the firefighter called out. "Something has changed underground. The gas flow has increased dramatically in the last 5 minutes." The hazmat specialist confirmed the readings with his equipment. "We're now at critical levels near the foundation. Any spark at all could trigger an explosion big enough to damage buildings for several blocks." Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized that all their careful evacuation work could be undone if the gas concentration reached the point where even small electrical discharges from emergency equipment could cause ignition. They were balanced on the edge of disaster with no margin for error. "Everyone needs to clear this area immediately," Captain Martinez announced. "We're pulling back to a safer perimeter until the gas company can shut off the main valve." But the gas company technicians delivered devastating news. The main shutoff valve was located in a utility vault directly beneath the area with the highest gas concentration. Approaching it safely would be impossible until the leak could be controlled from another location. "How long would it take to access an alternative shutoff point?" the fire chief asked. "Minimum 4 hours to locate and access the next valve in the system," the technician replied. "And that's assuming we don't run into complications with underground access." 4 hours was far too long to maintain the current emergency response. The gas would continue to accumulate, the concentration levels would become increasingly dangerous, and the risk of accidental ignition would grow exponentially. Something had to be done to break the deadlock, but every option carried enormous risks. Sarah found herself thinking about the research she had done into gas leak emergencies during her investigation. She remembered reading about specialized foam suppressant systems that could be used to control gas dispersal in emergency situations. It was a high-risk technique that required precise coordination, but it might be the only way to create safe conditions for emergency crews to access the shutoff valve. She approached Captain Martinez with her suggestion, knowing that he might dismiss her input as amateur interference in professional emergency management. "Captain, what about using foam suppressants to control the gas dispersal? I read about a similar situation in Texas where they were able to create safe access corridors using specialized foam application." The fire chief looked at her with surprise. "Where did you learn about foam suppression for gas leaks?" "I've been investigating infrastructure problems in this area for months. I researched emergency response techniques as part of understanding the risks involved." Captain Martinez considered her suggestion for a moment before turning to his hazmat specialist. "Could we use foam to create a safe approach to the valve?" "It's possible, but it would require perfect timing and coordination. If we make a mistake, we could actually increase the risk of ignition." The situation had reached a critical decision point. Every option carried significant risks, but maintaining the status quo was also becoming increasingly dangerous as gas continued to accumulate. Sarah realized that her months of investigation had prepared her for this moment in ways she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just reporting on a crisis. She had become an integral part of the emergency response. Sarah Martinez had always been the smallest person in any room she entered. At barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with a soft voice that barely carried across a crowded newsroom, she had learned early in her journalism career that people often looked right through her. The senior editors at Channel 7 News treated her like an intern even though she had been working there for 3 years. They assigned her the fluff pieces, cat rescues, bake sales, and community garden openings. Never the hard news that she desperately wanted to cover. Every morning, Sarah arrived at the station an hour before anyone else. She spent that quiet time researching real stories, following leads that the veteran reporters ignored. She had developed a network of contacts throughout the city: construction workers, small business owners, school teachers, and municipal workers who trusted her because she actually listened to them. While her colleagues chased after politicians and celebrities, Sarah had her ear to the ground where real life happened. The newsroom buzzed with the usual chaos of deadline pressure and competing egos. Senior correspondent Brad Morrison dominated the assignment board, claiming the biggest stories for himself. He was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, loud, and confident to the point of arrogance. Brad made it clear that he considered Sarah a lightweight who would never amount to anything in serious journalism. Martinez, he called out one Tuesday morning, not even looking up from his phone. There's a school board meeting tonight in Riverside. Something about budget cuts. Should be perfect for you. Sarah bit back her frustration. School board meetings were important, but they weren't exactly breaking news. Still, she nodded and gathered her equipment. She had learned that arguing with Brad only made things worse. Instead, she channeled her energy into doing the best job possible with whatever assignment she received. The Riverside Elementary School Board meeting was exactly as boring as expected. Parents complained about cuts to art programs, while administrators defended their decisions with budget spreadsheets. Sarah dutifully recorded the proceedings, but her mind wandered to a conversation she had with her contact at the city planning office earlier that week. Something about new construction permits in areas with old infrastructure. It seemed like it might be worth investigating. After the meeting, Sarah drove through the Riverside neighborhood instead of heading straight back to the station. The area had seen rapid development in recent years. New apartment complexes and shopping centers had sprouted up seemingly overnight. But as Sarah drove down Oak Street, she noticed something odd. The street was torn up for what appeared to be emergency utility work. Orange cones and barriers surrounded a massive hole where workers had been digging. She parked and walked over to the construction site. A city worker named Miguel was securing equipment for the night. Sarah recognized him from a story she had done about road maintenance the previous year. "Hey Miguel, what's going on here?" she asked, pulling out her notebook. Miguel looked around nervously before answering. "Gas line repairs. But between you and me, this is the third emergency repair on this block in 2 months. The whole system is falling apart." Sarah's journalistic instincts kicked in. Falling apart how? These new buildings are heavier than what the old infrastructure was designed for. The gas lines are shifting, cracking. We're constantly patching things up, but nobody wants to admit we need a complete overhaul. Too expensive. This was exactly the kind of story Sarah lived for, something that actually mattered to people's safety. She spent the next 2 weeks digging deeper. She requested city records, interviewed current and former utility workers, and mapped out every gas line repair in the area over the past year. The pattern was clear and alarming. The infrastructure couldn't handle the increased load from new development, but city officials were downplaying the risks. When Sarah presented her findings to news director Janet Walsh, the response was predictably dismissive. "It's a maintenance story, Sarah, not exactly primetime material. Besides, you don't have any official confirmation that there's actually a dangerous situation. But the pattern shows patterns aren't facts. Come back when you have something concrete from city officials." Sarah knew that getting city officials to admit to infrastructure problems was nearly impossible. They would deny everything until something catastrophic happened. But By then, it would be too late. She decided to keep investigating on her own time, building a stronger case that couldn't be ignored. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a geology professor at the local university, had been monitoring soil stability in areas with new construction. When Sarah reached out to her, Dr. Rodriguez immediately understood the significance of the gas line failures. The soil composition in that area is already unstable, Dr. Rodriguez explained during their interview. Add the weight of new buildings and the vibrations from increased traffic, and you create conditions where underground utilities become extremely vulnerable. A significant leak could have catastrophic consequences. What kind of consequences? In the worst-case scenario, if you had a major gas leak in an enclosed space with an ignition source, we're talking about an explosion that could level multiple buildings. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had found her smoking gun, but would anyone listen? Dr. Rodriguez agreed to go on camera, providing the expert testimony that gave credibility to Sarah's investigation. Armed with this new evidence, Sarah went back to Janet. This time, the news director paid attention. The combination of documented infrastructure failures, expert analysis, and potential public safety risks was too important to ignore. Janet agreed to let Sarah produce a full investigative segment for the evening news. But, Janet warned, if this turns out to be much ado about nothing, it's going to reflect badly on your credibility. Sarah threw herself into preparing the story. She worked 18-hour days, double-checking every fact, organizing her evidence, and crafting a narrative that would make the complex infrastructure issues understandable to viewers. She knew this was her chance to prove that she could handle serious journalism. The story aired on a Thursday night in early October. Sarah presented her findings clearly and compellingly, walking viewers through the evidence of failing infrastructure and explaining the potential risks. The response was immediate and polarizing. City officials were furious, calling the story irresponsible fear-mongering and questioning Sarah's qualifications to report on infrastructure issues. Mayor Davidson held a press conference the next morning, dismissing the investigation as amateur journalism and assuring the public that all safety protocols were being followed. Ms. Martinez clearly doesn't understand the complexities of municipal infrastructure management, the mayor said. We have qualified engineers and safety inspectors who monitor these systems constantly. There is no imminent danger to the public. The backlash was swift and personal. Brad Morrison made sure everyone in the newsroom knew his opinion of Sarah's story. She's trying to create panic where none exists, he told anyone who would listen. This is what happens when you give serious assignments to someone who isn't ready for them. Even some viewers criticized the story on social media, calling Sarah an attention-seeking reporter who was trying to advance her career by scaring people. The negative response stung, but Sarah remained convinced that she had uncovered a legitimate safety issue. Dr. Rodriguez stood by her assessment, but she faced pressure from the university administration to distance herself from the controversial report. The geology department received angry calls from city officials and local developers who claimed the story was hurting property values and damaging the city's reputation. Despite the criticism, Sarah continued monitoring the situation. She maintained her contacts with utility workers and kept track of every new repair in the area. The pattern of failures continued, but now the workers were under strict orders not to talk to reporters. 3 weeks after the story aired, Sarah received a call from Miguel, the city worker she had originally interviewed. His voice was tense with worry. "You need to know something," he whispered into the phone. "We're dealing with a major leak on Maple Street. Big enough that they've got specialists coming in from the county. But we've been told to keep it quiet until after the city council election next month. They don't want any more bad publicity." Sarah's heart raced. This was exactly what she had predicted, a serious gas leak that was being covered up for political reasons. She knew she had to investigate, but getting confirmation would be nearly impossible given the official silence surrounding the situation. She drove to Maple Street that evening and found the area cordoned off with construction barriers. A few city vehicles were parked nearby, but no workers were visible. Sarah parked a block away and waited, hoping to catch someone who might talk to her. Around midnight, a county hazmat truck arrived. Technicians in protective gear began setting up monitoring equipment around the blocked area. Sarah tried to approach them, but security guards quickly turned her away. Still, the presence of hazmat specialists confirmed that this was no ordinary utility repair. The next morning, Sarah called every contact she had in city government, trying to get official confirmation of the gas leak. Everyone either claimed ignorance or referred her to the mayor's office. The mayor's press secretary issued a brief statement saying only that routine maintenance was being conducted and that there was no immediate threat to public safety. Sarah knew she was onto something big, but proving it was becoming increasingly difficult. The city had clearly learned from her previous story and was now controlling information much more tightly. She spent hours researching emergency response protocols and studying building layouts in the affected area. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The gas leak was occurring directly beneath the Riverside Elementary School, the same school where she had attended the boring board meeting that started this whole investigation. The building housed over 200 students and staff members during school hours, and they were sitting on top of what could become a massive explosion. Sarah tried calling the school principal to warn about the potential danger, but her calls weren't returned. She contacted the district superintendent's office and was told that all safety matters were handled in coordination with city officials. It became clear that either school officials didn't know about the gas leak, or they were part of the cover-up. Frustrated and frightened by the implications of what she had uncovered, Sarah made a decision that would define her career. She couldn't wait for official confirmation or approval from her news director. People's lives were potentially at risk, and she was the only one with enough pieces of the puzzle to understand the full scope of the danger. That Friday afternoon, Sarah positioned herself across the street from Riverside Elementary School with her camera equipment. School would be in session for another 2 hours, and she planned to document whatever evidence she could find of the gas leak situation. She had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, her investigation would transform from a story about municipal negligence into a race against time to save lives. The autumn air was crisp and still as children played in the school's courtyard during their afternoon recess. Sarah watched through her camera viewfinder, hoping to spot signs of the gas leak that she knew was somewhere beneath the building. Everything appeared completely normal. Teachers supervised children on playground equipment, while others sat at picnic tables working on art projects. Then, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. Near the building's main entrance, she could see a slight shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But the temperature was only in the 60s, far too cool for that kind of thermal distortion. She had seen something similar during her research into gas leaks. The shimmer was often the only visible sign of escaping natural gas. Sarah grabbed her phone and started recording, zooming in on the area where she had spotted the shimmer. As she watched, the distortion seemed to be getting stronger. Her heart began to pound as she realized what she was witnessing. This wasn't just a small leak that could be managed with routine repairs. This was a major rupture that was venting dangerous amounts of gas directly into the air around the school building. The wind was completely still, which meant the gas wasn't being dispersed. Instead, it was accumulating in the low-lying areas around the building's foundation. Sarah knew from her research that natural gas could reach explosive concentrations very quickly under the right conditions. All it would take was a single spark from a car engine, an electrical switch, or even static electricity to trigger a catastrophic explosion. She had to act fast, but she also had to be smart. Running onto the school grounds shouting about a gas leak could cause panic that might actually trigger the very disaster she was trying to prevent. People running, car doors slamming, electronic devices sparking. Any of these could provide the ignition source that would set off the accumulated gas. Sarah called the school's main office from her car. The secretary who answered sounded harried and busy. Riverside Elementary, how can I help you? This is Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News. I need to speak with the principal immediately. There's a potential safety emergency. I'm sorry, but Principal Johnson is in a meeting with parents. Can I take a message? No, you don't understand. There's a gas leak near your building. You need to evacuate the school right now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure? We haven't received any notification from the city about any gas problems. I'm absolutely sure. The leak is getting worse. You need to get everyone out of the building immediately, and you need to do it calmly to avoid creating any sparks or sudden movements." The secretary's tone became skeptical. "Ma'am, I'm going to need some kind of official confirmation before we can evacuate the entire school. We can't just take the word of a reporter." Sarah realized she was wasting precious time trying to convince school officials who had no reason to trust her. She needed a different approach. Hanging up on the secretary, she immediately dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "This is Sarah Martinez. I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. I'm at Riverside Elementary School, and there's a major gas leak near the building. You need to send emergency crews immediately." "Are you reporting an explosion or fire, ma'am?" "No explosion yet, but there's a visible gas leak, and the wind conditions are creating a dangerous accumulation. There are over 200 people in that building. We'll dispatch units to investigate. Please stay away from the area until emergency crews arrive." Sarah ended the call knowing that emergency response would take time that might not be available if the gas concentration reached critical levels. She made a decision that went against every protocol she had ever learned about emergency reporting. Instead of staying safely away from the scene, she was going to enter the potential danger zone herself. She grabbed her press credentials and emergency radio, then ran across the street toward the school. As she got closer to the building, she could smell the distinctive odor of natural gas, the sulfur-like scent that utility companies add to make leaks detectable. The smell was strong enough that she knew the situation was even worse than she had initially thought. The school's front entrance was busy with parents arriving for a scheduled evening conference. Cars were pulling into the parking lot, and doors were slamming as people got out. Each sound made Sarah cringe, knowing that any spark could trigger an explosion. She had to get everyone away from the building before something created an ignition source. Sarah approached the first parent she saw in the parking lot, a woman getting out of an SUV with 2 small children. "Excuse me, you need to move your car away from the building immediately. There's a gas leak." The woman looked confused. "A gas leak? Are you at the school?" "I'm a news reporter, but that doesn't matter right now. You need to get your children and yourself at least 2 blocks away from here. And please don't start your car engine until you're safely away." The woman seemed uncertain, but something in Sarah's urgent tone convinced her. She gathered her children and began walking quickly toward the street. Sarah continued moving through the parking lot, warning every parent she encountered. Some listened and left immediately, while others demanded more explanation or wanted to go into the school first to get their other children. Sarah realized she needed help from someone with authority that parents would respect. She ran to the school's main entrance where she found a security guard checking in visitors. "Sir, I'm Sarah Martinez with Channel 7 News. There's a major gas leak near this building. You need to help me evacuate everyone immediately." The security guard looked skeptical. "Lady, I haven't heard anything about a gas leak. If there was a real emergency, we would have been notified." "Look, I can prove it." Sarah led him outside and pointed to the area where the gas was visibly shimmering in the air. "Can you smell that? That's natural gas, and it's getting stronger." The guard's expression changed as he caught the scent. His training kicked in, and he immediately understood the danger. "Oh my God, you're right. We need to get everyone out of here." Finally, having someone with authority on her side, Sarah felt a surge of hope. The security guard had radio communication with the school's administrative office and could coordinate an evacuation much more effectively than she could working alone. "But we have to be careful," Sarah warned. "No alarms, no sudden noises. Gas explosions can be triggered by the smallest spark. We need to get people out calmly and quietly." The guard nodded and began radioing the main office. Sarah could hear him explaining the situation to the principal and requesting an immediate but controlled evacuation. While he handled internal communications, Sarah continued working the parking lot, directing parents away from the building and explaining why they couldn't use their car engines. The gas odor was getting stronger by the minute. Sarah estimated that they had maybe 10 or 15 minutes before the concentration reached dangerous levels. With over 200 people in the building, getting everyone out safely in that time frame would require perfect coordination and a little bit of luck. She watched as teachers began leading classes out of the building in orderly lines. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly, but It seemed agonizingly slow when every second mattered. Sarah positioned herself at the edge of the parking lot, directing people away from the building and toward a safer gathering area 2 blocks away. In the distance, she could hear the sirens of approaching emergency vehicles. Help was coming, but Sarah wasn't sure if it would arrive in time. The success of the evacuation now depended on maintaining calm while moving quickly, a delicate balance that would test everyone involved. As more people streamed out of the building, Sarah realized that her investigation into infrastructure problems had evolved into something much more immediate and personal. She was no longer just reporting on a potential danger. She was actively working to prevent a catastrophe that could have claimed hundreds of lives. The small-town reporter who had been dismissed by her colleagues was now the person standing between a community and disaster.